Bang, bang. What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are really excited about this interview. I really enjoyed it. I think you will as well. But before we get into that, make sure that you like this video so that more people on YouTube can find it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And don't forget that BlockFi is the sponsor today. They've got 3 products. You can buy and sell crypto on their crypto exchange. You can deposit crypto and earn up to 8.6% APY in an interest-bearing account, or you can deposit crypto and take out a US dollar loan against your crypto collateral. You can use the description right here, or you can go to blockfi.com/pomp to learn more. All right, let's get into this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Michael here with me. Thank you so much for doing this, sir.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. I want to start off. I saw an article and it described you as a pizza mogul, which we're going to get to in a second. But any pizza mogul who's got this specific phrase is on one of the walls of the locations of And Pizza. It says, "Where it all takes shape, where decisions are made, where pioneers walk and walls talk." Why is that on the wall of one of your locations?
Yeah, that's some of our weirdness shining through. So for every shop that we design, prior to getting into the actual like physical space, our architecture and interiors, we start off with inspiration. And so we kind of go through the history books and find out like what made that particular location, whether it was a piece of land, whether it was a building, like exist in the first place. And we write some like off the wall copy around it. And that kind of leads us through the process of eventually getting the architecture and design work itself. But every pizza shop is designed differently. So it's part of the fun process of, flexing, what creative muscle we have and making sure that we're not thinking about this as, just multi-unit, that every single thing that we build has purpose and has intention, and that we're paying homage to what was there before, but also doing our best to bring something, of value to that neighborhood or community that's a little bit different and that hopefully can, last a fairly long time.
And so when you think about the way you're approaching this, everything seems to be different in literally kind of thinking of it from first principles standpoint. The pizza industry is cutthroat. Many people are trying to find the most efficiency. They're trying to figure out how they can systematize things, how they can almost make it clinical to some degree. You seem to be doing the exact opposite. Why?
Yeah, I mean, for 2 reasons. I think the first is that if you kind of go back to the origin story, right, this was much more about a greater purpose. We always talk about the and pizza coming before the actual pizza, right? And that was about promoting unity, uniting the working class, et cetera, around fair wages, living wages. But on the pizza front, I've always felt like if you're going to do something right new and you're going to enter into an industry that you have no experience or track record of building or innovating or doing anything inside of, that you need to really bring a strong point of view. And that point of view, has to be, cross-functional, meaning rethinking every aspect of what it means to make and serve and sell pizza ultimately. And, kind of going through the exercise of, well, it's, at the time it was 2010, 2011 as we were ideating, but what would a modern version of this look like? But then most importantly, where do you want this to be 10, 20 years down the road? And so even when you think about like a ventless and electric cooking platform, I remember I got laughed out of the room. I was on the rooftop of a hotel, and Sweet Grain has a Sweet Life, or they used to have a Sweet Life festival, right, every year, which is kind of cool for like, a multi-unit salad brand. Of course, they were much more lifestyle, but I remember they introduced me, the 3 founders introduced me to a reporter that was, a journalist working at Eater. And her first question was, what oven are you using? Because this is a time and a place where it's the Neapolitan craze. And so if you didn't like source that brick from that oven at the bottom of Mount Vesuvius, like, how dare you make pizza? And I'm sitting here, actually, it's a, hybrid, like electric, conveyor belt oven, right? That's people haven't necessarily seen before, but it was very functional. And the reason that we did that is we knew that we wanted to operate non-traditional spaces and be able to make pizza from anywhere. It's relatively plug and play. And so even something like that, that's sort of wildly unpopular, but incredibly functional, like we doubled down on that. And it was a thing that we had to work through, which is, do people think you can actually make a decent pizza off of a conveyor belt? And so we just kind of rethought every aspect, willing to fail, right, and put it all on the line, including coming to New York and operating the toughest pizza marketplace in the world, where most fast food entrants never come, or multi-unit never exist here, because you get slaughtered really quickly. And if it worked, great. And if it didn't work, we were cool with that as well.
What was your background? It doesn't sound like you grew up in a family full of pizza makers. So what did you do before this?
Well, I am half Italian. So my dad loves the fact that the Lastoria, he loves the fact that I am in the pizza business. But before this, two things. I moved to New York at 22. I grew up in a small country town. It was actually a hamlet, one flashing light, one bar, 500 people. I actually went to the same building from kindergarten through 12th grade, like literally the same. There was one building, and rode the bus. And it's always funny because when you're in kindergarten, you ride the front of the bus. And when you're a senior, you're at the back of the bus. And every year you move like one seat back and then that's just small town, rural America. So maybe I went to New York at 22, started up an ad tech company. That was my first startup because, I got a job basically in a boiler room making 350 phone calls a day and realized that wasn't going to be it. And I didn't have a resume or a network that was going to get me any type of a corporate job that was interesting. And so it was basically start your own thing or, remain in sales doing that. And so I started my own thing very early on, got lucky, timed the sort of ad tech market right. I was able to exit in 4 short years to a private equity group, stayed on board to run that as CEO. For 3 years, went through 2 acquisitions and a merger. And then, when my 3-year contract was up, needless to say, I was out the door. Reporting into private equity was not my thing. But then started up an ad agency, with my best friend and partner, Doug Jacob, who, we've been in business for a long time together. Now he's doing some really interesting things with Anvest and in the SPAC world. But, it was a creative itch that we wanted to scratch and see, how do we actually make cool stuff for founders and for executives, make them fall deeper in love with the very brands that they were running or that they created, and had a hell of a run there. We sold our agency in 2017 to a large Japanese beauty conglomerate, Shiseido. And along the way, it was always looking for, basically looking to create a company that was about something more meaningful to me personally. Right. That took sort of, how and where I was raised and applying that to having lived, in New York and really wanted to quote unquote change the world. And so this notion of, can we create a company that's really focused on high quality jobs? I think that's one thing in America that's really hard to come by right now. There's too few of high quality jobs and high quality food under a socially conscious umbrella. And that was sort of the big mission. And I think that's extremely important. Like, we don't talk about this notion of what does it mean to be a responsible employer or even entrepreneur around like, what are you doing? And I think great job creation is extremely important since we've shifted from a manufacturing country to one of food service. Food service industry employs 10% of America's workforce today, which is crazy. And those jobs on average went from $26, $27 an hour to now $10, $11 an hour. And that's been one of the greatest shifts that's not talked about in terms of like income inequality, is just that there's been a structural shift in terms of where the jobs are being created, and food service jobs are not doing as good of a job as they ultimately should, right? By paying higher wages and taking care of the workforce. There's a responsibility as the largest employer to do that. And the restaurant industry is the second largest private employer outside the federal government. So we've got to do better. And I think part of doing better is building a company by example and proving that your hypothesis around paying people more and being able to produce a type of profit that has people excited, right, to invest in the concept and that it can grow, leading by example, and then taking that and being an open book and trying to shove it, down every single fast food executive's throat around like what you actually can do if you approach it with a different set of eyes. How do you guys solve that problem? So it's tough. I mean, every single day, we're talking about, what does it mean to be, a good employer and provide high quality jobs, right? It started with wages. I think wages is the easiest solve, right? Because that's just transactional. If that means that tomorrow you make a little bit less because you're paying more, right? Over time, actually the opposite happens. We've seen massive margin tailwinds, right? Our profitability on a per shop basis has increased year over year since 2017, where most in the industry, it's going the opposite direction because we see such exceptional productivity, right, with respect to labor, and people care deeply when they walk into the 4 walls of a pizza shop, right? They treat it like it's their own, mainly because they respect and trust the company and its leadership, that we actually have their back. And every time that we've been challenged, right, we do step up on their behalf. But then that's the starting point, right? Now we've taken it as far as providing paid time off for activism, right? This summer, we give 3 full days of paid time off for that, so people can get out there and allow their kind of voice to be heard, so that they can meet other people that are like-minded and get around the causes that they ultimately want to support. Like that's as far as it's going, and I think there's much further we can go as an employer. But you got to constantly be finger on the pulse, communicating with your workforce and thinking about what would you want ultimately, and then listening to what they would want in terms of that relationship. And you start treating the people as like friends with shared interests versus the employer-employee thing. And it starts to work. But look, it's taken we're coming up on a decade here, right? And it's taken every hour of every single day of those 10 years for us to get directionally correct around what does it mean and how can we be a better employer across the board. So it's like you got to just constantly chop wood every single day, and you'll get the breakthroughs in terms of the progressive policies that actually stick. Right, where 80% of the workforce is using them, and they talk about that stuff as the reason why they're working for the organization.
You've raised over $100 million at this point from some very, very well-known investors. I don't know if you want to share who some of them are or not, but why are they interested in this? It's not every day that you see some of these folks investing in not only a pizza and kind of fast casual, if you will, type experience, but on top of that, you've got this like non-economic mission as well. And so what's driving that investment interest?
Yeah, I think they see the vision in terms of, what something like this can be at scale. And when you think about, like, especially in our industry, go back and look at like legacy fast food, like who wouldn't want to own In-N-Out's balance sheet, right? In-N-Out Burger right now is thriving, but they were the OGs of paying living wages, right? That was one of the best jobs that you could get in California, right? They were paying up, taking care of their workforce. I mean, they have a religious bend to them, right? Which is sort of where their values originate from. And it's worked. Starbucks is the same thing, right? Progressive policies across the board, taking care of their workforce, the first to offer Beanstalk to every single employee. So it's like when you go back and look at companies that were built the right way, and if you have time to hold on to that investment, you believe that the person is authentic, that has a differentiated brand and product, and you believe it can change an industry, like that's a good place to park capital. But again, we've targeted family office money, right? We've stayed away from traditional private equity because the returns have to happen too soon, right? 3 to 5 years is too short a time period to invest in a business like this because, we're in year 10 and we're just getting started with it all kind of coming together and that hyper growth really coming to fruition. Because when you're building something, the right way, it isn't only so fast you can ultimately go.
So when I think about the pitch, right, kind of the story as to why you're doing this and how it's playing out, I think some people get confused. They say, "Oh, this is a social impact thing, right? This is not a for-profit type endeavor." They couldn't be further from the truth, from what I understand. What metrics can you share with us, just in terms of how big the business is? Whatever you're kind of comfortable sharing, to really just prove that, hey, look, this isn't just about the social impact. There's a real attractive business that's driving all of this.
Yeah, it's I guess you could call a little bit more conscious capitalism. There's a lot out there, different versions of fill in the blank capitalism that sort of describes this. I think it is important to note that, for us to make an impact, we have to show proof that, our hypotheses are actually coming to fruition. And you can't go to, an advocacy group. You can't go to McDonald's CEO, with numbers that are upside down, because anybody can spend money and lose money. It's a pretty easy thing to do. I mean, we've seen it in many tech companies, not hard, right, to take a bunch of money and burn it. So you actually have to be very disciplined with the economic model that you're building. And for us, we're coming up on 25% four-wall margins, 50% cash on cash returns, which basically means that we're paying back, our pizza shops within 2 years, which is best in class. 25% margins. The last time that we saw that was Chipotle, right, and Shake Shack kind of at the peak. I mean, we're doing 20% margins, north of 20% margin intra-COVID right now. And so the business is very profitable. And I give a lot of that to, of course, like the technology and the operating system that we built, but the labor productivity and our family and workforce coming together and showing up. We have 50 locations now, and we are opening 27 this year. We actually opened 11 locations intra-COVID, which was really cool. Right, agreed to play offense really early on, make big investments in our people, get back to swinging hammers and opening up pizza shops, and we will triple in size in the next 3 years. That's what we are capitalized for, and that's the direction that we're ultimately going. Primarily on the Eastern Seaboard, so think from Boston all the way down through Atlanta, and filling aggressively in those markets to make sure that we're clustering right the way Domino's, that we're saturating, making it really easy to get our pizza, and getting closer and closer and closer to our customers.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and I think a lot of what's driving the interest and also the growth of the business is this very kind of innovative approach that you're taking to various aspects of the business. I kind of think of it as a first principles thought process or a systems thinking, and those are playing out in a whole bunch of different kind of mechanisms. I'm going to throw a couple of those out there, and if you can just riff on where did the idea come from, how did you implement it, and how's it going? The first being the mobile kitchens. So maybe describe like what is a mobile kitchen and where'd that idea come from?
Yeah, you think about it like a larger food truck that looks a little bit more like a hybrid food truck slash semi. And the notion was, can we produce the same quantity of pies that we do in a pizza shop in something on wheels where we're taking less overall real estate exposure and we can scale faster, right? Because of the mobility aspect of it. And we can do it infinitely for far less capital, right? We're fully outfitting a mobile kitchen. It's a $200,000 capital outlay, right? A pizza shop is call it between $650,000 and $750,000 cash outlay. And so if you can do more of them faster with less risk and exposure and get closer to your customers, that could be a really interesting thing. Part of the challenge with it is, that was very innovative, but now intra-COVID, as a lot of markets and real estate are getting repriced, right? It's actually easier for us to just go build pizza shops. We've kind of pulled back a little bit on the mobility, pressed forward on the pizza shop, suburban expansion, which has been in our plan, but we find ways to use them to basically extend now the pizza shops themselves. So I'll look at a pizza shop and say it's doing $2 million of revenue, but also recognizing that between a 10-minute and a 15-minute drive, right, there's $500,000 of revenue there. And yet I know that I really don't want to be exceeding a 10-minute drive time, right? Because the quality of the pizza starts to deteriorate, right? Once it's sitting right outside of a hot box, or, the further and further away it goes from the oven itself. And so you can put, a mobile kitchen there. It doesn't have to necessarily be main and main. And all of a sudden now you're serving higher quality pies faster to that customer base, and you can extend the radius further out from there. So you've picked up incremental revenue and providing higher quality revenue. We talk about that a lot because I think one of the biggest challenges that the food industry has is that there's been a lot of low quality revenue. There's been a lot of mediocre delivery, even from great branded restaurants, that now that kind of sizzle of what made them special, which was the four-wall experience, they don't have the muscle and they don't have like the actual off-premise or delivery in the DNA of the organization. And so it's not playing to their strengths. And that's a real big challenge. Like most restaurant brands are e-commerce companies. And if you look at, the executives and you look at the resumes of those executives, like that's not what you would hire if you're building an e-commerce company, right? It's about production. It's about logistics, right? It's about customer acquisition, like real omni-channel customer acquisition, like things that we talk about in other industries, but you'll never find an intelligent conversation around like true customer acquisition, right, in the restaurant business, because it's very foreign to many of the operators and entrepreneurs. And so that's one of the things that's going to be, I think, some of the biggest challenges is that the structural shift, it's a different business. And if you don't have that skill set or capability in the organization, it's going to be painful, and people are going to be more particular. Like people are going to care as there are more options. As restaurants reopen, they're going to want better quality food, and they're going to expect that food that's supposed to be hot shows up at your doorstep hot. And if you can't deliver on that, like they're going to go elsewhere.
It's fascinating to hear you think about kind of that four-wall experience and the mobile experience as really just kitchens. One is mobile, one is not. But it's what is the proximity to geography and drive distance. And it almost feels like you're talking about the mobile and static experience in kitchen as very comparable, actually. It's more so just one has a unique feature that it can move and the other doesn't. And so you can kind of mix and match as you see fit to serve the customer.
Yeah, look, whether you're Domino's, Amazon, Walmart, like it's about, fulfillment. And the fulfillment centers, you ultimately want to get closer to your customers so you can execute, right? If we're talking about like bigger box, like they want, sub 1 hour execution of on-demand ordering to get whatever you want. In food, like the intra-COVID experience of this kind of like 30 to 45 minutes, candidly, it's bullshit. Like that's a terrible amount of time to wait when you can get probably something from Amazon in the same amount of time frame. So like we need to get in food down to these, sub 15 and I think 10-minute times from the time that you press, that on your phone, something showing up at your doorstep. And that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest hurdles is that, the competition expectation for what on-demand ordering actually looks like and the fulfillment of that, like the bar is raising, and the bar is not necessarily being raised by, food servers or even the marketplaces like the Ubers and the DoorDash. Love them, right? But they've got a lot of kinks to work through in terms of being a hell of a lot faster. And on top of that, like actually setting up like fleets and courier networks that are capable of and have the resources to handle hot food. And part of the reason why food shows up in all different types of forms is that you could have, pizza, right, being delivered, and there's a cold item that's going to someone else right after your visit, and your pizza's been sitting on top of something cold and it's just sucking the life out of it. Like that's a real issue and something that needs to be addressed. But yes, I agree with you. It's all about production. It's all about logistics. It's all about fulfillment centers and how do we get closer to our customers to meet that on-demand, off-premise ask, right? That needs to get faster, it needs to get better, and it needs to happen really quickly, or else you're going to lose, I think, a lot of what you potentially gained intra-COVID from, a new digital customer because they have a ton of optionality.
Another one of the innovations that you guys have driven is this pizza cube. What is that?
It's the same thing, think just like a kiosk. So it's just a lighter CapEx way to build a pizza shop that in theory, can be stood up, right, in, call it half of the actual like construction time, and can be broken down and transported. So, no different than a shipping container. It's just, small box production with the key that we can make and produce pies in 300 square feet, no different than we make and produce in 1,500 or 2,000 square feet. And that just brings costs down and allows for that incremental scale. And I think that's an incredibly important thing. Plus, again, when we talk about this notion of getting closer to the customer, you can't be spending the same amount of cash every single time. Meaning if my limiting factor is that I need to hit the cash on cash returns for a 750,000 square foot pizza box, I'm not going to be able to do that right across a city and make it work. I'll be missing big pockets where, there's revenue there, but maybe not the revenue that pays back the $750,000 investment. There's revenue that will pay back a $400,000 investment or a $200,000 investment. And so when you look at like cash on cash returns, we don't need to do $2 million per box. If I spend half the amount of money, I can do $1 million in a particular pizza shop, and that will work just as well, right? Because you're generating the same cash on cash returns.
Yeah. When you think about this, people might hear, oh, he wants to get the pizza to them in 10 minutes. How do I keep my margins? How do I do this in 300 square feet rather than 1,500 square feet? What they're not hearing is, I want to make the best pizza in the world. But I think that, again, a misconception may be that you are willing to kind of give up some of the quality of the product itself in pursuit of this innovation or these efficiencies. Talk a little bit how you think about balancing the innovation and the technology and some of the more kind of forward thinking stuff with just the key being the pizza's got to taste good.
Yeah, I mean, we don't talk about that often, mainly because to some extent it's a commodity, and what people like in terms of what their best pizza is often very subjective, and oftentimes has to do with where they grew up and the pizza they consumed as a child, because you have this psychological connection to this product that you loved, and that's your version of what pizza should taste like. People that live in New York for extended period of time, it's hard for them to eat pizza elsewhere because that's their version of really good pizza. I don't disagree. I think New York makes some of the best pizza in the world, right? I'm biased to that. But I think the key is for us is that, part of the downside to fast food is that it's incredibly chemical laden, right? The manufacturing, the production process of big pizza and fast food at scale, right, is not actually what you want to put in your body. If you look at a more recent video that was posted, it's like 54 ingredients go into making a Big Mac. Right. Of which like the first one, you can literally it can corrode and erode metal. So it's just like, so part of getting closer to customers is that clean food, right, which our supply chain is incredibly clean. It gets colder faster, right? It doesn't actually have the staying power that unclean and chemical laden food ultimately does. And so that's a big part of it. Yes, I know the demand is going to be there because people are going to want us to get to the doorstep faster. But for us, it's actually solving for the high quality food, because the stuff that we source and the stuff that we put on a pizza isn't going to taste as good 30 minutes versus right out of the oven, right? Because we're not doing the big pizza hacks in terms of the things that they do to keep the food hotter and to make the food ultimately travel longer, because we actually care deeply about what people are consuming and what they're putting into their bodies. We won't compromise on that. We spend a lot of time on the R&D specifically around that, which is how do you make clean, healthier, right? Because it's still pizza, ingredients travel and still taste delicious. And the honest answer is get there faster and reduce the delivery times, because it's a really hard thing to do. It's a very slippery slope once you start compromising, which we won't, we never have, right? The actual quality of the ingredients, because you can make things that taste really good that are really bad for you. And we're trying to avoid that. Yes, we're in the pizza category, but we still think that, 10, 20 years from now, people are going to be consuming healthier versions of it. It's just pizza as an industry is so far behind. It's fascinating. Like the last to get on the vegan train. There's one large national pizza chain that now is buying product from Beyond. And I was talking to the executive chairman the other day, and they're just not calling. And meanwhile, I'm banging down the door being like, where's my vegan pepperoni? That's the number one product innovation and request that we don't have right now. It's just because it's a very dated and tired industry as it relates to quality of food. When you have someone like White Castle, right? White Castle has, a vegan product, and they had it years before anyone in pizza, which is just baffling. So we're trying to stay, finger on the pulse of, globalization, of making indulgent food taste really good, and making sure that, the quality of the supply chain is, as a 10 out of 10 and is as clean as humanly possible, because we don't want to make you feel like you have to take a nap. And that's what you'll feel if you have lower quality ingredients in pizza. That's why when people go to Italy, they're blown away at how they eat and consume and yet feel great. Right. Like it's there's a way to make it happen where you're not clogging up, your gut and wanting to take a nap every day.
A lot of the innovations we've talked about are what I'll consider technology innovations or platform innovations. Another thing is just the way that you interact with your employees. You've given your cell phone number, as far as I understand, to everyone, literally from the cashier to the store manager to people in the back office, vendors, the whole 9 yards. Why are you doing that? And then what's been kind of the impact of it? Do people call you all day long and text you and they're complaining or cheering you on, or what's happened since you've done that?
It's been yes, it's a bit of an experiment, but for me, it's, part of the reason why I got into the business in the first place, right? You can't say, we're focused on high quality jobs, high quality pizza under a socially conscious umbrella, and then not be focused on those three things. And so for me, providing high quality jobs means that I need to be very close to the workforce. I need to be there and accessible day in and day out, hour in and hour out, or as a leader, so that I'm getting all of the data, right, that I can around what's working, what's not working, how can I be a better employer. I think on top of that, though, it's also the part of the business that I love the most, right? That's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, which is, yeah, sure, you have to deal with from time to time, some of the negativity if someone had, as an employee, a bad experience or was frustrated, or their manager or their boss, did X, Y, and Z, helpful data points. But then oftentimes it's, them thanking or reaching out with product innovation, with inspiration, with, hey, I came across this, what do you think? And that's the type of stuff that makes me feel more connected. And that connection, I think, is deeply human, deeply personal. It gives me more empathy, right, as a leader, and I think helps me get through some of the toughest days when you're balancing, a very dynamic business in the middle of a pandemic, right? It's the people side of the business, the most human side of it, that is the most rewarding. And the text message platform, we have that for all communication now. So you can't call an Pizza as a customer, you can't email us. It's all done via text. And, our SLA in terms of getting back to people now is right around 90 seconds. And we do it with actual human beings, not chatbots or automation. You get a live person on the other end of that text, which I think is really cool. And we use that for our workforce as well. So everyone has my number. They also have, the number, right, that goes to the same group of people. So employees can talk to me, or they can talk to any of our family members that are working, the text line day in and day out, and get access to anyone. I make sure that's an important thing. Every executive needs to be wildly accessible. I am incessant on, if you write me an email, you will get an email back, right? If you track me down on LinkedIn, as annoying as that platform can be, right, with all the pre-canned messages that you get, like I respond to every single one, and I try to make sure every single person that comes to work for And Pizza does the same, because I know what it was like in sales, right? Reaching out to people, I know what it was like on the other end, and I just try to make, whether it's an employee or customer communication, to be there, be available, and be very quick with rapid response.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We've talked about the mobile kitchens, the pizza cube, this kind of cell phone experiment, which all seem to be positive outcomes for innovative thinking and first principles thinking. What are some examples of things that you guys have tried in the past that haven't worked? And then at what point did you realize, hey, this isn't working and we should kind of give up on it and move on to other ideas that we have?
Well, I think that the mobility, was a big one. Right. It didn't get the scale that we initially intended, largely because, as I mentioned, sort of the pandemic shifted, right, the focus. But the other side of it was actually too early on from an innovation standpoint. Jurisdictions, right, like cities and counties, they didn't know what to do with this thing. They didn't know what to classify it as. And so it was really hard to get permits. I mean, you have a lot of experience, right, in that, meaning like they just didn't know, like, what do I do with this thing? It's not a food truck. It's too long to be a food truck. It's not. And so like we literally are in like multiple counties, like waiting on permits now all over, right? Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, et cetera. And there are still to this day, like they're stuck on desks because people don't know what to do with them. So like there's issues there where sometimes being a little bit further ahead on certain things. And there's a solve for that. It's just wildly expensive, and we don't have the capital to go really solve for that, right? To beat down the doors the right way. And so like that would be a good example of like, probably too early, and there's probably another way to go do it, which we've solved for in smaller footprint, and now kind of our version of ghost kitchens, which I think a lot of that business is, I don't want to use the word garbage, but I think it's pretty lowbrow. Like there's a lot there that doesn't work for me, that I think is a lot of hype and not a lot of sizzle or substance. And it's like Domino's has been doing basically a ghost kitchen for decades now. Right. When you find a Domino's, it's like you took two wrong left-hand turns, right, in a neighborhood that you were unfamiliar with. And there's a Domino's because the real estate costs nothing. They're hoping that people don't actually drive up to it, and they're just using it as a delivery hub. So they've been around for a long time. But that's a good example. But I would also say like we made a lot of software investments. Like we built our own software stack and operating system that was very early on, and we were kind of building alongside some of the third-party software systems that were out there. We didn't want to cobble together. We wanted to be able to own it because we thought it was going to be a differentiator, and it is, but it's expensive. If I go back, say maybe we could have gotten away earlier in the life cycle of just using what was out there, focusing elsewhere, and not spending the type of capital. But then a pandemic hits, and you have a platform, and it works, and you go from 2/3 in shop to 100% digital overnight. And all of a sudden, shareholders are cheering you on because you made those big investments and it worked, and that's what kept your doors open. So it's like those little things where it's like you asked me 2 years ago, yeah, we probably spent too much on tech, too early on mobility, and we work a hell of a lot harder than we should. Like that's, I would say, like working for And Pizza is a very difficult job, right? You're going to be asked to fly at 50,000 feet and be in the weeds, right? You're going to be asked to be innovating while you're also operating. And that could put a lot of stress and strain on the business. Like the things that we do are unproven often. You don't know if they're going to work, and you're working twice as hard for, in many cases, the same results because you don't know what that breakthrough thing is ultimately going to be. So we could make it a heck of a lot easier on ourselves by not doing a lot of this stuff, and probably would have seen a similar amount of success because we didn't need to do 30 things. We just needed to do 3 things. But that's just not, my personality or perspective on like how I think we need to win, which is change everything to the point you made earlier, which is it is a little crazy. It's a little batshit crazy, but it's the type of company I feel like if we can get to the other side, and we're starting to get there, that, there'll be a good, multi-decade run based on the engine and the way it was built, right? Where there's going to be a lot of relevance 10, 20, 30 years from now because of how hard we worked at trying to get it right and get every aspect of it right. And not just differentiation or innovation for innovation's sake, because that's purposeless, but where there's actually a reason for everything to be different. And it all makes sense, right? In a world that is now shifting dramatically from analog to digital. And every restaurant brand now needs to have a lot of the stuff that we built and needs to have this type of thinking, because who wants to pay for 3,000 square feet when you can do it in 500 square feet, and far fewer people actually want to sit right inside of your Shake Shack or your Sweetgreen or your And Pizza.
It's very true. One of the ideas I'm really fascinated with lately is this idea of entrepreneurs as investors. And what I mean by that is you've got capital, both financial and intellectual capital that you manage, and you have to choose when and where to make those investments and measure what is the return on the investment. How do you think about that as the founder and CEO of a business? And are there things that you've learned over the years that other founders or CEOs can learn from in terms of those investments of both the intellectual and financial capital?
Yeah, I mean, we have a bit of a luxury in that the cash on cash return metric in our business is so obvious, right, and so straightforward. So if we're going to make a non-pizza shop investment in something potentially non-traditional, whether that's investing in an interesting product that we're going to put right on the pizza and we're going to kind of blow it out. A good example, I personally invested in Mike's Hot Honey, and we pushed that brand very hard. It's done incredibly well. I mean, kudos to the team there, Mike and Matt. And we share investors, and that business is literally like a 10 out of 10 right now. But a lot of it just comes back to, we're actually looking at making some non-traditional investments right now. It comes back to, can we beat the cash on cash returns that we typically would invest in building out a pizza shop? And that's sort of the guiding light that we look through all of this. And so there is some, there's real math that goes into it, but we've been very, I think, conservative around that, because at the end of the day, the fastest path for us to get scale to be able to really do that is by opening up more pizza shops and driving this, truck straight down the middle of the field. And so just making sure that we're not getting overly distracted. But look, like there's days I would love to park our balance sheet into Bitcoin, right, and be one of those guys, right? Because of course, then you're heroic and you don't need to raise capital because you just raised all the capital that you needed, right? Going from 10,000 up to 60,000, there are days you want to do that stuff, but that's a bit risky, and the investors and shareholders didn't sign up for that type of thinking. So we'll be crazy, but we won't be as crazy there.
It feels like it's easy to sell people on making an investment in Mike's Hot Honey or another pizza shop. The whole Bitcoin conversation is a whole different ball game.
Absolutely.
But I can appreciate that you've thought about it. That is that might be the most important part. Before I get into the rapid fire questions to wrap us up here, what's your favorite memory over the last decade of building And Pizza?
My favorite memory, two of them. One was when the mayor of Washington, D.C. signed legislation to increase the wage in D.C. to $15 an hour. And she did it outside of an And Pizza. And we were a big part of it since we've been championing that movement for a long time. And to do it, there with, a whole bunch of And Pizza family members, like that was a really special moment. And then introducing the first Raise the Wage Act on Capitol Hill with Senator Sanders, Senator Pelosi, and Senator Schumer. We've gone through, obviously, as you know, multiple iterations, and I'm super bummed that minimum wage got pulled out of the most recent legislation, and really hoping that we can do everything in our power to wind that back up. But that was a pretty proud moment, because the only reason I was there is because we built that into the business model, and the business model worked, and so we're a part of a lot of councils around how you can make this work, right? And you can profit from it. And so, with a vision to a piece of legislation that of course ultimately went nowhere, but just to know that, anyone can kind of dream big as it relates to wanting to actually change the way people think and change federal policy, and be there and to be a part of it because of a cool pizza business that you built. I'll never forget that. And, we're going to keep fighting that good fight, and hopefully we'll get that minimum wage to where it needs to be. But I look back at that and I say, damn, if it wasn't for the amazing people and to be able to have this platform to do stuff like that, I can't imagine doing anything else in this world, like for a job, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're building a company you go work for. Like, I think it's fantastic.
I love that answer. It's a fantastic answer. I got 3 questions for rapid fire, and then you get to ask me one to finish us up. First is, what is the most important book you've ever read? It's tough because there are so many. Like, I never had a traditional mentor growing up because I grew up in such a small rural town. And so it was the books that got me through. I want to say probably the first one that
made me think about the employer-employee relationship a little bit different was Let My People Go Surfing. And it's the founder of Patagonia. He's an odd bird, but it was just really interesting to kind of get the perspective. He's a man that built product around a real need, and had a really different approach to what it meant to be an employer, and that really helped open my eyes to it.
What was the takeaway you had from the book? Like, was there one thing that you were like, just, hey, it's different, or was it something more specific?
The takeaway was you can march to the beat of your own drummer, and you can build a company successfully that gets better, over decades by, having a different type of a culture and, setting up policies to be progressive and to support, ultimately what the workforce is all about. Some of the best companies culturally are those where, the people working there are actually living ambassadors of the brand. You think about the Patagonias, the REIs, like there's not a day that you don't walk into, or at least pre-COVID, those retail stores, those people reek of that. Like they are working there to get the gear at a discount, and they have their next 3 trips planned, right? Where they're going to be out there, like literally living the brand, whether it's snowboarding or skiing or, mountain climbing, like that's it. And like but that can be applied to every industry, right? It's not just about like, those types of companies. We applied it to pizza, and that's like what paid time off for activism is to us, right? It doesn't have to be about the trip that you planned. It can simply be about, I want to go work for a company that supports my activism and that gives me paid time to go do it. Why not? And we're Washington, D.C. headquartered. Like, what a great idea for a Washington, D.C. company to lean into activism. So that's one of the cities, right, across America, one of the most popular cities for movements, right, and for marches. And so I think it's a great benefit. So that to us is like, our version of that, where it's not like the 50% discount because you can get all the free pizza you want when you come work at Aunt Pizza, but it's this notion of expressing who you are and your beliefs out there in the public, and letting the backing of the company and the resources that we have to help promote that and to support you, whatever that may be.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Second question is about your sleep schedule. It comes from our friends over at 8 Sleep. They've got this thermoregulated bed that I sleep on, which today I sleep super cold. My wife sleeps super hot, and I sleep like a little baby, but I used to only sleep 5 or 6 hours. What's your sleep schedule been over the years? Are you got to get your 8 hours? You don't sleep a lot, and how's that changed?
Yeah, so what is the product again? I'm actually, I may need to get this.
It's a thermoregulated bed. So basically, you can get a mattress or like a cover to go over an existing mattress. And then you essentially can, at 4 different points through the night, the temperature can be set. So you can start, kind of neutral and then get colder and colder through the night. And then right before you wake up, it'll kind of warm up. But basically the thought process is, especially for men, I think, sleeping in a colder environment actually gets you more REM, gets you kind of that deeper sleep. You wake up feeling more refreshed. And so the founders over there literally convinced me to become like this convert of the sleep religion. I got to get my 8 hours now. And I started sleeping on this thing, and I called him up and I was like, dude, I got to invest in this. Like, this is amazing. And so I'm a full on convert now for sure.
And what was the brand?
8 Sleep.
Oh yeah. Okay. I've heard, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to buy one. No, I'm telling you, everyone that has this has been telling me about it. And it's exactly that. Like, I used to sleep, growing up in Buffalo with the windows open in the dead of, winter. And like, I crave that. I need it to be freezing. My sleep is not great. Like if I want to get 6 hours of sleep, I have to be in bed for 8.5 hours. Like, I'm constantly moving. I wear an Oura ring that tracks it, that like just gives me anxiety now in the morning when I'm opening the app and it's going to tell me I didn't do what my body ultimately wanted to do. Right. It's like that. I've got to get this mental torture, but sleep has always been difficult for me. And the main reason for it is that I don't sleep well. And then when my head hits the pillow, it's just this onslaught of like ideation that like comes out of left field and nowhere. Actually, my best ideas are when I'm like half awake, when just it all comes together and I have to get up and write it down. But sleep has never been my friend. But I am going to get this 8. So I'm going to get the mattress cover
pod.
And the pod. Yeah, I'm going to get the pod.
Listen, I've told a lot of people, but I've never had someone buy it on the spot. So I'm
all in. 8 Sleep. Let's go.
I love it. Third question for you is a little bit more fun. Aliens, are you a believer or a non-believer?
This one gets you in trouble. I would like to believe in aliens, and I like the idea, right, that there's life outside, because I think it creates a lot more empathy, and it's humbling, right? Anytime you can remove yourself and look at something bigger, like you're a microcosm of the universe, I think that's a really good thing. Like, look, like all we can do is be the best version of ourselves. Like, things are going to happen. So I love the idea of aliens because it makes me feel less relevant. It makes, our species feel less relevant. And there are times over the past 12 months where I think that's been a good thing. But I think it just reminds us that, we are a small part of something much bigger than ourselves. And it's a really healthy reminder of it. So I'm on the pro alien side.
I'm right there with you. I think that probabilistically, they're real. They're somewhere. I don't know if they're green men, but there's something out there. So we'll see. You get to ask me one question to finish up. What you got for me?
All right. So what would you do? I guess the question would be pizza, NFTs, right? You're me right now. Do you do anything with it, or do you let it go?
I think that there's a balance, right? And I think of it less as like pizza, and I think of it more as community. And really what you're trying to do is you either want to create really, really unique experiences, or you want to essentially look at it almost like merchandise, right? So I say, what's the difference between taking, let's say, an image, putting it on a t-shirt and selling it? Putting that same image on a poster, or putting that same image in a digital kind of environment. And so I think that you've got to almost think of it from like the value to the audience, right? And one of the mistakes I see brands or individuals make is they're just like, oh, I can make money. And, I think that the way that you guys have built the And Pizza brand is like, that's as far away from kind of the values and the approach that you've taken. So you want to just really be really, really thoughtful about like, okay, what is this? And so one of the things that could be really interesting for you guys specifically is imagine if you basically tied the NFTs into some sort of experience, right? So if you said, hey, we're going to, auction off 5 or 10 of these, and whoever buys them, we're going to fly them in for a private dinner with you and the team. And they get to meet the investors, or see kind of behind the scenes, or shadow, for a day, or you'd have to kind of, think through like what is actually like a really, really valuable experience. But that's something where all of a sudden, is there really a difference between like selling tickets on Eventbrite versus the NFTs? No, not necessarily, but I do think that there's a ton of people specifically that have cryptocurrencies, right? They want to buy other digital goods. And so you're just showing up and kind of selling something in a new environment rather than the old environment. But you can get really creative, right? So I think like that stuff's super interesting. The other thing that I haven't seen people do yet is everyone so far has been thinking about like, how do I sell the NFT? But what happens if all of a sudden you were to say, hey, you know what we're going to do? Whoever is the number one customer at each one of our locations, we're going to give it to you. So rather than give you like a trophy, what if we give you this like digital good, right? And maybe there's some cool thing that you can do kind of with that. So I think that people are kind of just scratching the surface with kind of what's possible. They're starting to understand the technology and kind of all the different iterations. 5 years from now, I think you and I are going to be blown away by what people figure out and kind of how creative they are. But I think that's what makes it fun right now, right? Is like, let's see what people do. And you guys have a great brand, a great community that's highly engaged. So there's probably something to do. You just got to be smart about how to do it.
Amazing. I love it. Helpful.
I just trying to share the good word as always.
Beautiful.
Where can we send people to find you on the internet, Michael?
So you can find me Twitter or Instagram. It's just @_Lastoria, and you can follow And Pizza. It's the ampersand is not registered, right? So it was a letter at one point, but it's AND Pizza, and we're across kind of every social platform. But @_Lastoria and ANDPIZZA.
Amazing, man. Listen, thank you so much for doing this. You have taken a whole new approach to pizza, and my favorite part is that it's working. So keep going. I'm a big fan, and we'll have to do it again in the future.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Thank you for help spreading the word.